Reality revealed. India ended trade with America, turned China, you see. The world doesn't always change with an explosion. Sometimes it changes with silence, with a decision taken behind closed doors, with a move that looks small on the outside but shakes the balance of power forever. For decades, everyone assumed that India would always play safe, that India would always follow the script written in Washington, that India would remain dependent on Western markets to secure its growth. But what happens when a nation with 4 billion people decides it will no longer be dictated to, no longer be pushed into a corner, no longer be told who it can and cannot trade with? What happens is exactly what we're witnessing right now. India ended trade with America, and instead of collapsing as some expected, it turned to China, turned to Asia, turned to its own vision of power. And that one move sent shockwaves across the globe. People forget that this is not just about economics. It is about pride. It is about sovereignty. It is about whether a nation will allow itself to be treated like a junior partner forever, or whether it will stand up and claim its rightful place as a leader. For years, America used tariffs, sanctions, threats, and pressure to bend nations. They did it with Europe, they did it with Africa, and they believed they could do it with India too. When America slapped that 25% tariff and threatened India with more restrictions, they thought India would come begging, but India didn't beg. India looked around, measured its options, and quietly walked away. That's when reality was revealed. The truth is, America needed India more than India needed America, but the world had been fooled into believing the opposite. Let me explain what I mean. America is addicted to cheap labor, to a reliable IT hub to back in support that runs its companies and powers its tech giants. Who provides that at scale, at skill, at speed? India. You can pull cheap labor from anywhere in the world, but you cannot replace the scale and quality India provides. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, you name it. Their engines run with Indian talent. Now imagine when the very country that has been the backbone of your innovation decides that it doesn't want to play by your rules anymore. That's not just a business risk, that's a national security risk. India ending trade with America was not a gamble, it was a calculated move. Why? Because the future of the global economy doesn't sit in New York anymore. It doesn't sit in Washington anymore. It sits in Asia. The center of gravity is shifting. Look at the numbers. China, India, ASEAN. Together they are shaping the world's largest consumer market. Asia is not just producing for the world. Asia is consuming for the world. India knew this. India saw this. So why remain chained to a partner that tries to bully you, when you can build alliances with nations that understand mutual respect? Now let's talk about turning to China, because people will say, how could India, with its history of rivalry, border tensions, and mistrust with China, decide to shift its trade orientation towards it? That's where strategy comes in. The old world order told us that rivals cannot cooperate, that competition means enmity, but the new world order demands pragmatism. India and China may not trust each other, but they both understand that if they align economically, even partially, the West has no chance of controlling them. When two civilizations with thousands of years of history decide to put aside ego for interests, they create a new balance of power. That's exactly what is happening, and don't misunderstand this. India didn't just turn to China out of weakness, it turned to China from a position of strength. The timing was crucial. India has already built a massive digital economy. It has already achieved energy independence through diversified sources. It has already become one of the world's largest military spenders. By the time India walked away from America, it had enough resilience to absorb short-term pain. That's what power looks like, the ability to say no, the the ability to walk away, the ability to take short-term losses for long-term independence. That's why this move is not desperation, it's domination. Look at America now. They're scrambling, they're sending delegations, they're making speeches, they're calling it a temporary setback, but behind the scenes, they are in panic because they know the cost of losing India is not just billions of dollars, it's the collapse of their narrative. America always portrayed itself as the inevitable partner, the irreplaceable market, but India just proved that you can replace America, you can survive without America, you can thrive without America. That's a message not just to Washington, but to the entire West. And here's where the story gets even more interesting. The moment India ended trade with America, dozens of countries started calling New Delhi. Why? Because every nation wants alternatives. Africa is tired of being dictated to by Europe. Latin America is tired of being treated like a backyard by the US. Southeast Asia is tired of choosing between Washington and Beijing. India suddenly became the third option, the new hub, the country that had the courage to break free. The world respects courage. Nobody respects a nation that bows down every time pressure comes. But when you resist, when you take a stand, when you show that you will not compromise your sovereignty, suddenly nations rally behind you. That's the power of example. You know what America underestimated. They underestimated the hunger of 1 billion plus people. They underestimated the resilience of a culture that has seen centuries of invasions, colonization, exploitation, and yet never lost its identity. They underestimated the fact that India does not think in election cycles of 4 years. India thinks in centuries. America thought tariffs could break India's will, but tariffs are short-term, pride is permanent. You cannot sanction a civilization. You cannot threaten 1 billion minds determined to rise. Now let's talk about the future. By turning to China and Asia, India is not simply replacing one partner with another. No, India is reshaping the architecture of global trade. Imagine an Asian trade corridor where goods move from Shanghai to Mumbai, from Delhi to Jakarta, from Bangalore to Singapore, without touching Western ports. Imagine payment systems built not on the dollar, but on digital currencies backed by Asian central banks. Imagine supply chains controlled not from California, but from Chennai. That's the future India is building. And by cutting ties with America, India just accelerated that future. The real fear in Washington is not the loss of trade revenue, it's the loss of control. America controlled the world not because it produced everything, but because it controlled the systems through which everything moved. Finance, shipping, technology, payments, patents. India breaking away means America no longer has that absolute control. It's like removing a cornerstone from a building, the whole structure starts to shake. That's why this move matters more than numbers, more than GDP percentages. It's about breaking mental chains, and let me tell you something else. India didn't just end trade with America for itself, it did it for the global South. Every small nation now has an example to point to. If India can say no to America, why can't we? If India can survive without US markets, why can't we? If India can build partnerships on its own terms, why can't we? That's the psychological revolution happening right now. And once that revolution begins, you cannot stop it with sanctions, you cannot stop it with threats, you cannot stop it with propaganda. Let's bring this back to something very basic, respect. For too long, America's relationship with India was not about respect, it was about utility. They wanted Indian brains for Silicon Valley, Indian markets for their exports, Indian soldiers to balance Asia. But when it came to respecting India's sovereignty, they always looked down. That's why this break had to happen. Because respect is not requested, it is demanded. Respect is not given to the obedient, it is given to the strong, and strength is not in words, it is in action. India's action revealed the reality. Now, I know people will say, isn't this risky? Won't India lose access to advanced technology? Won't India lose investments? Won't India face financial pressure? Yes, there are risks, but let me ask you something. When has greatness ever come without risk? When has independence ever been free? Every nation that became powerful paid a price, but the return was sovereignty, and India has calculated that the price is worth paying, because dependency is slavery dressed up as partnership. And India has had enough of that, and here's the irony, by walking away, India will actually gain more technology, more investments, more opportunities, because once you prove that you're not afraid of losing something, people want to give you more. That's how negotiation works. The one who shows fear loses, the one who shows strength wins. America expected India to fear losing trade, but India showed courage. Now Europe is knocking, Russia is knocking, even Middle Eastern giants are knocking, all offering better terms, all eager to work with a nation that has demonstrated backbone. You want to know the truth. The truth is America lost India the moment it underestimated India. That's the reality revealed. This isn't about a single deal or a single tariff. This is about dignity. This is about who controls the future. This is about whether the next century belongs to the West or whether the balance finally shifts to Asia. And right now, Asia is winning, India is winning, the global South is winning. The West can scream, can threaten, can try to intimidate, but the truth has been revealed and it cannot be reversed. So understand this. India's decision to end trade with America and turn to China is not an end, it's a beginning. It's the beginning of a world where nations decide their own path. It's the beginning of a world where power is multipolar. It's the beginning of a world where respect is not begged for, it's commanded. And it's the beginning of a world where no single country can dictate terms to another. That's the reality. That's the shift. That's the power of one bold decision. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. The world is now entering an irreversible multipolar order, with India as one of its anchors. For decades, people assumed global power would forever be locked between Washington and Beijing, that the world would only ever have two centers of gravity competing for dominance. But history doesn't unfold according to assumptions. It unfolds according to decisions, risks, and shifts in power that cannot be undone. India's rise is not an accident of numbers, not just a byproduct of population size or GDP growth. It is the outcome of a conscious choice to innovate, to defend, and to define its role in a new world. What we are watching today is the crystallization of a new doctrine that India has shaped for itself. A doctrine that is not only about defending borders, but about projecting influence, about controlling its destiny, about ensuring that no other nation dictates the pace or direction of its growth. The truth is, for much of its independent history, India held back, restrained by the scars of colonization, restrained by internal debates about non-alignment, restrained by its economic limitations. But once the country shed its hesitation and embraced innovation, once it realized that survival was not enough and that leadership was the only way forward, the doctrine began to take shape. This doctrine is assertive but not reckless. It is innovative but not experimental without cause. It is strategic in every sense. India does not move just to show power. India moves to change outcomes, to tilt balances, to send signals that echo across continents. And that is why the global order is shifting irreversibly, because when a nation of this scale decides to anchor itself as a pillar of multipolarity, the entire architecture of power has to readjust. Look at the way India has fused technology with defense, innovation with strategy. This isn't about copying what the West or China has done. This is about carving a uniquely Indian path. Hypersonic missiles, indigenous aircraft carriers, nuclear, powered submarines, cutting-edge space surveillance systems, these are not mere trophies. They are pieces of a larger puzzle, a doctrine where no rival can dictate terms to India. Every innovation, from drones powered by artificial intelligence to cyber defense frameworks designed to withstand digital wars, points to a nation preparing not just for today's threats, but for the wars of tomorrow. And when a doctrine is built on innovation, it ensures that India is not reactive but proactive, not following trends but setting them. What makes this moment irreversible is not just military strength, but the combination of defense, economics, and diplomacy aligned in one vision. For the first time in centuries, India is not defined by how others see it, but by how it chooses to present itself. This is civilizational confidence translated into hard power. This is the rebirth of a mindset that says India will not be a balancing piece in someone else's game. India will be a player that sets the rules. That confidence has begun to ripple outward, shaping the choices of Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, regions tired of choosing between Washington and Beijing. They now see a third anchor, a power that does not colonize, does not dictate, but demonstrates strength through example. And that changes everything about the future global order. Understand this. Multipolarity isn't just about having many powers. It is about the collapse of monopoly. For decades, America enjoyed monopoly over finance, technology, security guarantees. When the Soviet Union fell, that monopoly looked eternal. But nothing in history is eternal. India's rise cracks that monopoly further because it proves that you can innovate outside the Western system. You can grow outside the dollar. You can defend yourself outside NATO. When 1 billion plus people live in a nation that not only resists Western pressure, but thrives after resisting it, the rest of the world takes notice. Multipolarity becomes irreversible not because the old powers approve it, but because the new powers enforce it. India's assertive doctrine is not aggression for its own sake. It is a shield and a sword designed to prevent exploitation. It is a message to both East and West that no one will decide India's future except India itself. And when that message is repeated through policies, through military readiness, through alliances built on respect, it becomes more than a doctrine. It becomes the DNA of a new world order. India is anchoring this order because it has the weight, the population, the economy, the military, and most importantly, the will. Willpower has always been the ultimate currency of power, and India's will to innovate, to defend, and to lead has never been stronger. Consider how the doctrine plays out in practice. When America threatened tariffs, India didn't bow down, it redirected trade. When China tested borders, India didn't collapse, it fortified and innovated. When Europe hesitated, India built its own systems. Each move reinforced the idea that dependency is no longer acceptable, that sovereignty is not negotiable, and that approach inspires nations everywhere. The multipolar order needs anchors, and anchors are not built by compliance. They are built by courage. India's courage to say no, to innovate when pressured, to defend when challenged, is why the multipolar world is no longer a theory. It is a reality. What we're seeing is also the fusion of hard power and soft power. The world listens when India speaks, not just because of its military or economy, but because of its civilizational depth. This doctrine is not born in a vacuum. It is born from a civilization that has survived invasions, colonization, partition, and yet stands with its identity intact. That civilizational continuity, when backed by modern innovation, creates a power that is both rooted and forward-looking. A nation like that cannot be dismissed. It cannot be contained. It cannot be treated as secondary. And that is why multipolarity now has a permanent anchor in India. Innovation is the heartbeat of this doctrine. Not just weapons, but ideas, systems, approaches. India is building alternatives to global payment systems, alternatives to global supply chains, alternatives to global information networks. Every alternative weakens the monopoly of the West and strengthens the possibility of a balanced order. You cannot call the world multipolar if all roads still lead to Washington. Multipolarity requires roads that lead to Delhi, to Beijing, to Moscow, to Brasilia, to Johannesburg. And India is making sure its roads are not only built but open for others to travel. That's how leadership is earned, not just by power but by enabling others to share it. For too long, the narrative was that India needed to catch up in technology, catch up in economy, catch up in defense. That narrative is dead. The new reality is that India is setting standards. From space exploration to digital identity systems, from renewable energy leadership to defense exports, India is no longer behind. It is ahead in many fields. This shift is psychological as much as it is material. A nation that sees itself as a leader behaves like one. And that behavior cements multipolarity because leadership cannot be concentrated in one or two nations anymore. The irreversible nature of this shift is clear when you see how quickly the rest of the world is adapting. Partnerships once thought impossible are now reality. Nations that used to hesitate are now leaning on India. The doctrine has made India reliable not just for its own defense, but for the security and balance of entire regions. That's what anchors do. They hold the structure in place. The multipolar order is like a vast ship, and without anchors it drifts. India has declared itself an anchor, and the ship is stabilizing in a way that no single nation can dominate anymore. This is the true meaning of the birth of India's assertive military doctrine, backed by innovation. It is not merely about weapons, it is about will. It is not merely about numbers, it is about narrative. And once the narrative changes, once the world sees that the old monopoly is broken, there is no going back. Multipolarity is irreversible because the example exists, because the proof is undeniable, because India has chosen its place and will not be moved. That is the reality of our time, the reality that defines this century, the reality that reveals itself in every bold decision India makes.